The train, the train.
It's coming to play.
Look, boss.
Good evening, ladies and gents. Thank you for joining us on this great Thursday night on Tony Talks Shh IT. Tony and Glenn.
Just getting that IT down.
Definitely.
Very good, Ange. Shh, IT is the IT that you talk either quietly or not much about.
Hidden gems of IT.
And we we've got some interesting stuff. You have been blowing my mind this week with ideas on different technology and thoughts. And one that we got to talk about earlier. Did you know you can put a Mac OS on a Windows PC?
Yep.
Or have you ever tried it?
It was more like back in the day, it was when people needed one or the other. They were talking about doing virtual machines using VMware and stuff using that way. And things had gotten easier and better since then, which is always good. The question was always
Yeah,
for this type of application, which way works best. And like you were saying before, like there's certain things for Mac that are definitely better and better to use on a native Mac rather than trying to do it on a PC emulating Mac, for example.
and sometimes you just need to be able to run a program that you can only run on one side. So having the programs that you need in some way is always better than being locked into only one operating system and never being able to open a file that somebody gives you.
And for me, it was also the option of being able to even just to be able to open it and look at the screen so that if somebody is describing something for me and I don't have, that's not the one that I normally use, I could bring up the other one and see the screens they're looking at, or at least see, the type of screens that they're looking at to help walk them through things more easily.
And best of all, you can test on that virtual machine, break it, do whatever is necessary to learn, and come back and clone it and start all over. It's the best way to learn an operating system and what you can do on it without damaging your main operating system. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my studio machine and get an install started. So that way, while we're talking, we'll be able to, hopefully by the time we're done tonight, have a full blown Mac running on this machine over here. Okay, are we getting our, look, there we go. Now, I'm going to use this program VMware to make my virtual machine. And this is just one approach on a Windows PC. You have a couple of different options and they're all free. So there is no excuse not to try making virtual machines and experimenting. You've got VMware, which in my case, I'm using VMware Workstation. This is their full blown product and allows me to run multiple machines at the same time. This is the one that the commercial product that they offer, which is great for running a bunch of virtual machines at once. I've got a base Windows 10. I've got our 3D studio that we're experimenting with in our ultimate DAW, where we're going to put every single DAW that's out there for Windows into and see how they play nice with each other or whether they do, because some of them don't. And what we're going to do is add a Mac machine because I want to make a Mac version of the DAW studio because I do have like 3 or 4 Mac DAWs that people have been asking me about. Not everybody wants to jump on Pro Tools. Some want the free options out there, and GarageBand is not the only free DAW in the Mac world. So I'm actually anxious to take a look at the 2 that I've been getting told are really starting to make inroads. So this workstation, there's a free version that VMware offers. You just go to vmware.com and it's called the VMware Player. And the player does everything that this workstation program does, but it only does it to one machine at a time. That's not a big deal though if you're just running one virtual machine. that free version will let you do that. So everything we're doing here in Workstation can be done in the free player just as easily. And out of the box, Workstation does not support the Mac operating system. It wasn't designed to, but it is so easy to add support for a Mac virtual machine. Basically, let me bring this web page up here and show you. Where I started with, and I basically started by searching VMware, Mac OS, Big Sur, because I want the latest version of the Mac operating system. If you do need an earlier version, Catalina, all the previous versions that have come out before, there are images out there for any one of them. And sometimes that is your scenario. You've got a program that only runs on a certain version of the Mac upgrades. And sometimes you do need to just put it on there so you can run that program, open that file, and do something with it. It's very useful for that without messing up your Big Sur version, because you do want the latest versions. So right here, right off the first link, searching for VMware Mac OS Big Sur is where you can find instructions on what I'm gonna be doing here. And it'll even give you some links to where to get the image files that you need. That's a little trickier. Getting the actual image files for the Mac OS. It's not that they're hard to get. It's not that you're really pirating in this case. The Mac OS is free, but Apple wants you to download it from the Apple Store. So normally the way you get this install image is through the Mac store. And that's the easiest way to get it. If you do actually already have a Mac, you can just go and get it from the store, and it will download the file that you'll need for this process. Me, I had to go, and because I didn't have a Mac at the time, I had to go get it where there are mirrors out there that keep copies of them, and that's your other approach. But this will help you to walk through all those basic steps and what you need. They'll tell you where to go get VMware. And the thing that I need in order to make VMware support Mac operating systems is this one patch program, which I've already downloaded on this machine. So I've got it right here, and it's as simple as extracting. And there's an win install command file. Now I'm not going to run this yet just because I want to show you the difference. If I go to make a new machine right now, and I say I'm just going to make a typical machine and get to this third screen, this is where it asks you which operating system you want to install. Out of the box, VMware Workstation has Windows and Linux machine support. But with this little patch update that we're going to do, it will tell it what a Mac operating system is, and it will give support to something that didn't have it before. Here is the patcher running. And for the most part, all it's really doing is giving it the hardware identities that for the virtual machine help it to understand how the Mac operating system looks at the hardware, which is not much different than how the Windows ones do. It's really just a small thing. I think VMware in the future, you might see them start to actually put this functionality into the actual program, because as you can see, there's no reason that it shouldn't be there. It's not that it can't. I think VMware chose to not put the support in because they didn't have complete cooperation from Apple. And that's a shame because, you know, Apple, that's part of the reason why they like to keep their operating system tied to their hardware. You will never get support from Apple for something like this. And Apple doesn't quite call this like, you know, pirating or Hackintoshes. Like this is for people who want to learn the operating system, get familiar with it. Apple actually does like people doing this because it helps them to get familiar with the operating system, and in some cases makes people want to go get those operating systems. And if you do want to use a Mac on a regular basis, especially in like music production, then you're going to want a Mac hardware, and you're going to want supported Mac hardware. This is the kind of stuff you do to learn and to experiment, load a file. The reason why I had to do this initially was because I had a client who needs to go from GarageBand mobile to GarageBand application to get loaded into Pro Tools so that we can extract the stems and put it in a new DAW. It's a process.
Yeah, for that one, I was wondering if it would be possible
Yeah.
to even use something like Dropbox or what have you to get all the files from, you know, from the pad and just get them over and bring them in. But you really have to do a conversion on them to get them out of GarageBand, right?
Yeah, well, yes, you have to be able to open them in first in the application. You have to get them over to the GarageBand application on the OS 10 side because there's a mobile GarageBand, and she built all of these songs on the iOS GarageBand. Those iOS GarageBand files will only go to either Pro Tools or to the, you know, the big GarageBand that you get over in the Mac OS.
Right.
You can open those projects in either GarageBand or Pro Tools. But if you open them in GarageBand, GarageBand does not support exporting tracks. So if I could export the tracks in GarageBand, then I would simply have opened them over here. Like with this virtual machine we're going to do, I'm going to be able to put GarageBand on here. I can open her projects. Even the big GarageBand doesn't export tracks. All you can do is export a mix. And she has full-blown projects, 15, 20 tracks, beats, vocals. She doesn't want to just make a mix of the project. She wants the tracks because she wants to load them for more advanced DAWs.
Now, technically, the thing is,
Cakewalk.
the way you could accomplish that, I mean, it would be extremely tedious or you'd have to script it. But basically, if it's a 15-track project, you could just mute 14 of the tracks and, you know, play it down. That's a mix down of just that one track. And then you do it again for track 2 and then again for track 3. You know, if you could somehow
Yes.
automate that process, you could
And
get it to spit them out.
at its worst, that's the solution that I concluded with her, was that if she wanted to in GarageBand, she could export each track individually, solo, you know, basically solo that one track, export it. Solo track 2, export it. The problem there is not only do some of her projects have, you know, 15, 20 tracks, which means 20 exports that you have to wait for, but she has over 250 projects. So that's not a real feasible solution for her because she would literally spend the next year or two converting her GarageBand projects into tracks that she can use in another DAW. The real solution is she has to use the Pro Tools. Pro Tools is the only thing that will take those GarageBand files and treat them the way they should be in a DAW. And this is where Apple, this is what I was saying last night about Apple's strategy with acquiring Pro Tools. They are basically using GarageBand as a like sonic crack for people to get hooked on. Oh my God, I mean, she made 250 projects. She's so hooked on it. But now you want to do something more advanced in a DAW, and you want to like be able to add effects and have individual tracks. They purposely limit GarageBand and that functionality. There's no reason why GarageBand should not export stems. I mean, these days, that's become the de facto. Everybody loves stems. I mean, Yeah, all you people on BandLab, if it wasn't for stems, BandLab wouldn't be as cool as it is. Okay, so let me check here. And now that I ran the unlocker, I should be able to do a new virtual machine and have options for the Mac in there. No, doesn't look like, oh, I might have to restart on that.
Yeah, I would say I have to restart the virtual machine.
Okay. Well, not just restart the virtual machine, the
Oh,
patcher.
yeah.
I have to reboot the physical machine. So I'm going to stop sharing on there. And I want to check out that exercise technique you were talking about earlier, because you did get me real intrigued there with those 8 different modes. And I'm trying to get my piano fingers back in shape after years and years of not playing. And it's time to start thinking of keyboard exercises. And Glenn has been showing me some amazing, especially on the bass techniques, that we're going to check out once in a while on here. And Glenn, if you want to get that set up while you're doing that, I'm going to stop this and get this machine ready to reboot. And hopefully when we come back later, we'll be able to see a Mac operating system in there for support.
Cool. We
Because
also had a
that'll take,
question.
that will take some time.
We also had a question from someone about how to remove dead space in BandLab without slicing and deleting. And what I'm not sure of is if that means the removal. Good.
Especially if it's at the beginning. Because dead space is not the same at the beginning than it is at the end
Yep.
in waves. If I'm removing dead space at the beginning, I don't like my timeline shifting. Anybody who cuts the whole timeline from the start messes up any synchronization that might have gone on with somebody who might be recording outside of BandLab. Never cut from the beginning. If you want to get rid of the dead space, do it after you've finished your master. Because you're gonna do all this stuff with these tracks, and okay, it's got a 5-second dead space at the beginning, and you want it to just come right in. Don't cut that 5 seconds while you're working on everything. Do the whole song. When you're done, you make a master and just cut the master. The master can start wherever you want. Never cut the project. Once the first track's been laid down in a project, never cut from the beginning. As far as the end goes, chop to your heart's content. You don't break synchronization chopping off the ends, but you will mess things up if you chop at the beginning and everything slides.
The other thing for
You don't want
me
your
is
track sliding.
I'm not a fan on the track sliding part. I'm not a fan of when there's little pieces. Like I know it happens in lots of different projects where there's just a little piece of a vocal here or a piece of a vocal there. Like if it's going to be vocals on that track, like I would like one solid file that goes from the very beginning through the last piece of sound that there was, just so that nothing gets accidentally shifted a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, because it's all one file.
Yeah,
it's going to be left justified and it's going to be good. So sometimes I'll take for that one. Yeah, it's just take the export and then that's the one way is for that one. For when you export it to another project, if you want to get rid of that beginning part, like you're saying, you can export it down and then you can cut it off of that, because that's another separate project.
Yeah, and that's a fast way of doing what I was talking about. Like me, I was suggesting like when you're all done, because that's what you do at the end. When you're making your final master, you're exporting the mix. You've done everything. You're getting ready to put it back on BandLab. Then you can snip it. But if you snip it there, when you put it back on BandLab, mute all the other tracks, but do not snip the tracks that are there. Just put the new one in, keep that one soloed. And if only that one's soloed and playing, then you won't have that 5-second gap. It'll just play this one. The project, though, will stay the same. Never move those original tracks. Some people that are involved in that, you'll break things. I have had times where projects got decent because somebody changed a BPM or did slice from the beginning, and all this work to get it to synchronize back to my original project. takes sliding a bunch of tracks. You don't want to put yourself in those situations.
One thing is if we're
And
talking
and
also,
and if T-Bone, if you're talking about just the general slicing and dicing in between, like say you got a vocal track and there's a lot of pauses in between them, and some people like me, I will snip dead air in a vocal track because I don't like a signal when there doesn't need to be one. Even silence isn't silent. So if you do like snip the dead spots in like a vocal track and things like that, me, I tend to just delete them, or I mute them. Deleting is good because you actually use less computer power at that point. A track that doesn't have anything to play doesn't take computing power. It just basically, that's an empty track. If you mute it though, you won't hear it. And if for some godforsaken reason there's something in that silence that you say later, oh, I wish I hadn't deleted that, at least if it's just muted, it's still there to unmute. And that sometimes that's how I snip those vocal tracks where there's a lot of sound as the voice comes in and a lot of decay as the voice goes out. When I'm snipping those, I'm not always sure if I snip the tail perfectly. So I don't delete the air in the middle. I just mute that stuff. And if I do feel like, ah, damn, I cut it too close, you can go unmute it, re-snip it, and it's better than not being able to get it back.
actually, one thing I could show you that somebody else was just talking about the heavy breath in between. Like that's one that I just did with Riders on the
Yeah.
Storm. I was working on Riders on the Storm. And
Yeah.
I recorded myself. And afterwards, I realized I was really, I could really hear every breath between every one of those things. So I literally went in and did a chop in between each of them, cut that little piece out, and then went back and merged it all into one track at the end. And as far as getting the empty space out
Every
of the beginning,
breath you take, huh?
every breath I took right out of there. Took them straight out. But for the very beginning of the track, a lot of times, like a vocal, like you're saying, like somebody's getting ready, so there'll be an inhale or there'll be mouth noise or whatever before they actually start. So a lot of times you'll just roll the beginning of the track back to the very beginning of that. And then I'll cut a little dead air, like you were saying, at the end of a project where I know it's actual empty space. Like I'll extend the track at the end, cut that, drag it to the very beginning, and then merge to that. So I have, again, a left justified, but definitely silent. And I merge that into the track. So it just brings that silence up to when the person first starts speaking. And that basically gets us back to being left justified at 0, but no sound at all until the person opens their mouth. So that's one way of doing that. As far as that keyboard one, you want to do on the one with the left-handed bass on keyboards, right?
Yeah. The one you were saying, the 8, what did you say? She had 8 techniques on different bass approaches.
Yep. One of them
Is
is
that the
10.
theme?
One is 10 heavy bass patterns. And this is actually, the first 5 are actually on bass and the other 5 are on a keyboard. But the idea is in a project, these are just very simple bass patterns that you can use to get started. And it does include MIDI files from her page here. Let me.
Yeah, and that's what I'm actually interested in, because me, when I look at a MIDI file, that's how I learn. That's my sheet music these days. So I do need to practice. My left hand is the hand that I never developed. I've managed to have a good right hand developed when it came to my piano techniques, but my left hand, I never got to a comfortable place. And then I took a break for the last 10 years. Coming back in now, I'm finding my left hand is confused or bored.
It definitely gets tricky. So this one, she's going to start right in with the patterns. She has them actually listed in the comments down below.
And this is more advanced than just doing scales, because for me, practicing scales, I did that and it doesn't help my left hand at all.
So let's try this.
Pattern 1, root 5th root.
She gives some examples of different songs.
You might be thinking to yourself, Isabel, that's way too simple. It's not interesting. I quit. What I would say to you is, no, bass is the foundation. Keep the bass simple and the rest of your music will have the support necessary to succeed. Think of songs like Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash or Love Me Do by the Beatles and My Girl by the Temptations. They all use it. The reason that this bass line works so well is that the root and the 5th of the scale are the most neutral sounding notes. The root is the first note of the chord and the 5th of the chord always leads nicely back to the root. Simple. All right, number 2, follow that bass drum. If you're playing with a drummer, they might already have an incredible groove going. All you have to do is follow the rhythm. A bass pattern that complements the bass drum creates a driving force that shan't be messed with. It's good enough for superstars like Justin Bieber in his song Hold On, Harry Styles' Watermelon Sugar, and you can hear it in the classic In the Stone by Earth, Wind & Fire. So you're in good company. It makes sense, right? When the bass and the bass drum team up as one instrument, you get a punch in the face. It can hit pretty hard. You have the foundation and smack of the bass drum and the note from the bass instrument. Smack! Bass line number 3 is heavy eighths. Keeping those eighth notes going is another great way to build a solid foundation. It's no wonder that artists like U2 used it in one of their biggest hits, With or Without You. Shout out to The Weeknd's Save Your Tears, Teenage Riot by Sonic Youth, and so many more. This pattern outlines the pulse and sets up any secondary groove for success. It's perfect to layer over without having to worry about what's going on down under. U2 is from Ireland. Pattern number 4, the slap. I mean, you've obviously heard this sound before. Is it a pattern though? Is it a sound? It's a pattern, I think. 1 second. Hello? Yes? The Bass Players Federation of Earth? It's Isabel Banos calling. I just wanted to confirm that slap bass is both a sound and a pattern. Yeah. Correct. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah. Oh no, I will see you at the Christmas party. How is Diane? I mean, it's technically an articulation, but don't tell the Federation that. The actual pattern exists within the slap, and you'll commonly find it in fast 16th note rhythms that get super.
That's an important distinction.
It's the raw energy in songs like Aeroplane by Red Hot Chili Peppers, Take the Power Back by Rage Against the Machine, and of course, the Seinfeld theme. What's the deal with the B movie? It should just be in everything. Why isn't it? You tell me in the comments now. And yes, I know the Seinfeld theme was actually played on a keyboard, not a bass guitar. Probably leaving it in the comments right now, but hey, that's okay. We love comments. It really helps with the algorithm. Pattern number 5, Bootsy on the One. It's a funk thing. This next pattern definitely warrants some kind of shinier wardrobe change, but hopefully you can just add some kind of dazzling top hat in post. Thanks to artists like Dua Lipa and Charlie Puth, funk bass patterns are making a major comeback. These amazing grooves were made popular by Bootsy Collins, a legendary bassist who played with James Brown and other game-changing funk groups. Bootsy was known for slapping, but his bass lines were all about beat 1 and leaving space. Having a heavy note on the first beat of the bar and adding funky little ghost notes in between helps make things feel really fun and bouncy, while also creating a great foundation for expressive vocals. Funk patterns are also looped over and over, with slight variations here and there, which is perfect for getting dancers to fall into a sort of trance. Perfect segue. Next up is trance. All right, so we're getting more into the electronic numbers now. So I've put down the bass and set up a synth.
I can listen to Bootsy
Here's one of the
all
most
day, man.
popular bass patterns in trance music. Feel that pumping? Trance bass gets its character from its compression being sidechained to the driving kick drum. You'll often hear 16th note arpeggiation too. Add those two components together and you're basically ready to headline your next local rave. BYO glow sticks. You'll hear this bass pattern in tons of tracks by Armin van Buuren, one of the most respected names in trance music. Since the bass ducks down in volume with every kick drum, it really gives the impression that the music is alive, going up and down, breathing in and out, putting the listener in a kind of trance. Whoa, sorry about that. I think I just saw time. When am I? Next up, the melodic. Bass is usually holding down the low end, but that doesn't mean you can't let it sing. Yeah! Think of songs like Come Together by the Beatles or Bad Guy by Billie Eilish. Now, this really only works if your arrangement calls for it. It's a great place to feature the bassist and have them step into the spotlight. Alternatively, if you've got a killer bass patch going on, you can chuck some of your MIDI notes up the octave. Number 8, 808.
Yeah, do that
808s
all the
are
time.
all over modern music these days, and for good reason. Thanks to some creative resampling, the original kick drum
And that's
sound
where bass
of the
meets
Roland
drum.
808 drum machine was able to become the massively epic bass sound that we know and love. One of my favorite songs where the 808 bass line gets to shine is Information by Beyonce. And check out Dior by Pop Smoke.
When it rains, it pours. She like the way
You ever find yourself making this face? You're probably listening to an 808 bass line. 808s are the perfect low end to take up tons of real estate in a mix, get blasted through subwoofers, and they've got some serious attitude. If an 808 and I were in a fight, I would put my money on the 808 every time. But violence is never the answer.
Yeah.
Stay in school. Compost. Number 9, octaves. This one is a classic. It has the ability
Now
to make
that's
any
mine.
song dance floor worthy.
Yo, that's a Tony jam.
That's mine.
These bad boys can be heard on older hits like YMCA by the Village People and on new bangers like Midnight Sky by Miley Cyrus. You could even hear an octave pattern in the underground theme of Super Mario Brothers. Jumping between the lower and higher octaves is one of the easiest and most fun ways to bring so much more energy to a bass line. Octave bass grooves add a bouncy, danceable quality without overcomplicating the song's arrangement. Pattern number 10, dotted eighths. Final stop, Groove City. Population, so much grooviness. Official language, groove. Nailed it. You can really hear how this bass pattern complements the simple kick
That's
drum.
another
in
one
most
I use a
house
lot.
tracks. But you can also hear it add an extra layer
had
of
trouble trying to
soul
write
on
that
old
one out.
Motown hits. Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak definitely used it in their retro hit Leave the Door Open. It's also really popular in Latin and reggaeton music. This pattern is all over so many genres, and it makes sense. This is undeniably one of the most popular bass rhythms out there. That smooth yet stuttery
It's a fail-safe.
pure magique. It's simultaneously punchy and delicate. And depending on what the kick drum is doing, it can either make your body want to groove along like this, or dance your face off like this. There are so many great bass patterns to choose from. We really don't have time to cover them all. Why choose just one? Think of the song Special Affair by The Internet. They used roots and fifths, heavy eighths, and it's melodic, all in the same song. So, do you have a favorite you'd like to share? Let us know in the comments below. Stay bassy, everybody.
I'd like to know all of them, although I know which one is mine is the octaves.
Yeah.
And Take was saying it, so many trap beats sound the same nowadays, don't they? That is truth.
Very much so.
And that's because they don't seem to want to change their tempos anymore, and they work off of the same loops. Everybody goes and uses the same starting points and don't get more creative.
I
Oh,
think
and he
the one-
mentioned on the vocal, I was just going through the comments
Right.
on the vocal technique with that T-Bone was asking when it comes to breathing, and if you're picking up your breaths in between your songs, he was saying how it depends with your vocal technique and how you use it, how much that shows up. So true. And if you are getting those breaths, depending on whether the loud ones or even the tiny ones, that's where calibrating your mic becomes super important. You can, if your signal's so hot that you're picking up even little breaths, if quiet ones are getting picked up, you might have to bring back your mic signal so that you can get a good recording of what you're singing. If the breath isn't part of what you want recorded, then you got to calibrate your input back some so that you don't pick up those super quiet ones.
I also have
All
to
of that
improve my technique
becomes
about
important.
where the mic is and where my face is in terms of like, if I'm going to breathe in, turn to the side, get out of the way of the mic, all those kinds of things are just things that I didn't really notice until I started hearing how much it was coming through on the recording. And then when I was doing the chopping, just basically before every
you
vocal.
have the bigger challenge. You have the bigger challenge of with a deep, low voice like that. That's even more obvious in those breathing moments. If it, learning to breathe in the middle of a song, especially with some of these rap guys where they don't even give themselves enough time to breathe in between, that is tricky when the mic is hot.
Yeah. And actually, what
There's
I could
even
do
some
is
effects that can help with that too, like some of those dehissers, and some of those effects can help sometimes with that situation. But you got to be careful where and how you use them, or you can mess up the whole track running them. I'm not a big fan of DS filter solutions. I'd rather put an actual screen physically between the singer than run it post in an effect. It doesn't always fix what you want in those situations, but it can work.
actually I have a before and after example right here. If you want to hear the Riders on the Storm example we were just talking about, I can show you what the
Yeah,
heavy breath sounds like before and then after me doing the little cuts. See if you can hear the cuts. Yeah,
that has heavy breath in it.
yeah, it does.
That song literally has this scenario that you're talking about.
All right. So we got this one here, right? I'll start right in right.
Yeah, people need to make more weird sounds. Take two.
Yep.
If more people were into making weird sounds in their, especially rapping, they would bring some distinctiveness to themselves.
Definitely.
Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm.
Both breathing and mouth noise.
Into this house we're born. Into this one throne.
And you have to sing so soft that your breathing actually gets loud.
Riders on the storm.
And then this is after just
on the storm.
trying to cut that part out.
Riders
Yeah, well, that blended nice. Your two tracks there go nice between each other.
into this one throne. Like a dog without a bone, and after out alone. Riders on the storm.
See, you've done a good job of separating those two tracks that you kept there, and they are nice and distinct. Like the lower one that's going on in my right side versus the left one, which is a little higher towards the center, but they are both in separate sides.
We've got one at plus 15 and one's at minus 25. So they're not quite
Yeah.
balanced evenly,
Now that I see, that's exactly where I heard them. Yeah.
Now this I might have to do
And
that.
it's with the two tones. I mean, you had two tracks where they both had a lot of low end in the vocal side. So by separating them like that, you didn't actually have to worry so much about the booming that they were doing before. That's all disappeared now. Now they're kind of floating on in their spaces.
The other thing was about the effects. We were
That's
talking
not-
about the heavy processing load from all the effects that we're usually using. From this, I literally only have a little BL1176 compressor.
Yeah.
Is the only thing I have on either of those tracks. So there's no,
Yeah, and that's
not
all
a lot
you
of
need.
special effects. Or
That's
anything.
that's all you need there. If you, I mean, sure, you could use their what is it, the Space Maker.
Yep.
You could give it some reverb because I mean, he
Actually, I
had
did give
some
it some on. I gave it to it on the
reverb
built-in.
on his track. But me, I would give it the reverb. You know me, I would bring this over to Cakewalk and bust those reverbs.
Yep.
But other than that, like it's in all of it's in a nice space.
Yeah, for this one, I just basically put the 25% on the built-in reverb for each of those two tracks, just to get an idea of what it sounds like, this way. And then
Yeah.
if I were to bring it over to Cakewalk, like you said, I'd take that out and just take the clean tracks over. But it's not a lot of processing added to it, because sometimes it's very easy to fall into the trap of over processing your stuff, or you pick one of the presets. You're like, oh, I love the way this preset sounds, and I always want to use the bumps every time or whatever, which can it adds a lot of things, but you don't have to add all that stuff.
And some of those presets actually do add some really good things. And I agree, if you just turned off a few of the non-necessities, because I can't believe how many I've seen in the last week where like this preset is not a bad preset, but it does have like 2, 3, sometimes even 4 parts of it that are useless. You end up
Right.
turning all those off and just using the space maker. Turns out you don't need that preset. Just bring up a space maker and or the built-in reverb. The built-in reverb on the BandLab side is not bad, at least for a starting reverb. If you do go in and tweak it, you can turn that into all those presets you hear on the space maker. That bass reverb can become a hall or a dance floor.
Now, one note
So
about the waveform that we're looking at. The top two are the waveforms of Tony's overall track of just the music, and you can see how it's a much fatter waveform as far as it's got higher signal, not in a bad way, but just in terms of higher signal all the way across. Where the vocals that I did, they're very low. They were very low on the recording. That
yeah,
compressor actually is what brought them out. So if we listen to just part of one of the vocal tracks isolated for real quick, and then I'll pop the compressor off and back on, and you'll just hear the difference in the volume.
To this house we're born, into this world we're thrown.
So it's like recorded almost not there.
got
Like a dog
baby's got back.
out alone, rides on the stone. They're together on the road.
And it's not copies of the tracks either. It's just two separate recordings. That was another point that we were talking about earlier, was if I were to just get that one recording and make a copy of that track and pan it somewhere else, it would sound okay, but there are issues that can pop up by doing that, where they can cancel each other out, or you can have it get too loud in certain spots. Same thing if you have it panned exactly at 15 on one side and exactly at 15 on the other side, and it's a copy of a track, it can introduce more issues.
Yeah. Be careful with that kind of synchronous movement in music. Music is better spread out. Tracks are better spread out, not equally. If you put something at 15 on one side, taking a duplicate of it and putting it at 15 on the other side doesn't help the sound. It will actually do some weird negating sometimes. Certain instruments, you can counter frequencies. Better to have a little randomness to your directions. They shouldn't all be trying to follow, unless you're looking for a specific kind of sound. I guess if you were looking for, like, let's say like a really a beat, a dance beat or something, where you were looking for a weird kind of stereo precision. I have heard people do some funky things with stereo bouncing, where the bouncing becomes a rhythm in itself. Then synchronous mixing might actually be useful for doing something weird like that. But generally, when you're trying to separate, say, two vocal tracks, you duplicated this vocal track and you want to have two of them, and you want them to kind of be on different sides. You don't want to put them on the same space in each side. You might lose some of the effect you're trying to gain.
The only
Because the
exception I
way
would
they
make to that,
spread. And
the only exception I would make to that is if I was doing a hard pan left, hard pan right. Like if you've panned something all the way left and you pan the other
Yes.
copy all the way right, then they're not interfering.
and you see
because it's
that
no
all the
energy
time.
on the other side.
Yes. And those are sometimes for different, if you're going to do a hard pan all the way, because in the MIDI world, like they do that all the time in the MIDI world. To fatten up a guitar track, they'll take the two copies of the same MIDI and push one all the way to the left and use the overdrive guitar, push one all the way to the right and use the distorted guitar.
That's a key point right there too. Different effect on each
Well,
side.
yes,
that
they
makes it
have
really
to. They
jump
have
out.
to sound different. They have to sound different. If you actually use the same sound and you do that, not only does it not help, it doesn't. I mean, it might sound like it's fattening. It's not. It's just making it louder. But the frequencies that are bouncing at those exact same directions can get in the way of each other. They negate, almost like, that trick that they used to make karaoke tracks these days. Those old songs used to always have the vocals mixed to the center.
Right.
So nowadays, if you want to just make a karaoke song of a recording from the 70s or 80s or even the 90s, you could basically take that waveform, go into an audio editor, you duplicate the wave, you inverse it, and then you take the inverted and the original and you merge them back together. And what happens is the center gets negated because all those frequencies in the middle are pulled out. And that's the technique that they use to make these half-ass karaoke tracks. When you hear a karaoke track out there that sounds like the original recording, and you hear this mushy little vocals that might have been there one time, but they're off in the distance, and you think, oh yeah, I can sing over that. That's how they do it with those. They're just taking the original recording, inverting the wave, and then smushing it back together. And the frequencies of the center get negated because of that.
Yep.
And the same goes with when you're panning. Where I started to notice this is I use a lot of different instruments. So sometimes I'll have like 2 or 3 tracks that are using the same patch. And if I had something like a saxophone and I used to pan like equally. I was like, oh, if I'm panning to the 25, I should pan 25 to the right. I used to think that way. In my old recordings, my instrument tracks that I was doing that, I put this sax there and this sax there. I started to lose one of the tracks. I was like, wait a minute, I'm losing frequencies, and sometimes they would get lost in the mix afterwards. And I realized that like these frequencies were negating themselves being in the same space, even though one's on the left, one's on the right. They were in the wrong sphere of the space.
Now, if you were using a compressor on vocals, Tony, would you, and you're using one of the ones that are built into BandLab, would you favor the BL1176 or the FBK compressor or the Digicom? Or do you have like?
I would ask you, when it comes to BandLab's compressors, you guys out there, you're the ones using the BandLab's compressor. My compression on Cakewalk, I tend to go to the DBX. I like Dolby's compression. They've got like 2 or 3 of them that are my go-tos.
Now, these are
And actually, that Blue Cat has a few useful things there, which we could probably be talking about next week.
One difference I would say, just in the quick look at these 3 that are just some of the 3 that pop up immediately. The FBK compressor has the makeup gain option, which is a good option to be able to give yourself, like if you need to get more gain back, you can compress a signal and then push it as much as you need to. So like in the case of those vocals there, if I were to just use the FBK compressor on this one,
his brain is squirming like
you can push the makeup gain right from here without changing the volume on the track.
Yeah, see, now that's starting to push into the.
Let your children play.
Yeah, you start getting into the clipping past
By pushing
halfway.
too much. Yeah, exactly. And then this was the middle one, which again, I'm not sure. Instead of the first one, I was using a 12-to-1 ratio.
Yeah,
This one's using also a 12-to-1.
let me hear the. Let me hear the digi. That's the FBK.
His brain is squirming like.
And that one really fluctuates.
Let me get the same piece of the vocal.
On the stove.
This one there. FBK.
There's a killer on the road. His brain is squirming like a toad.
The one I was using was the BL1176.
Yeah, see, the FBK has a.
Battles on the stove.
This one you can push the input or out.
There's a killer on the road. His brain is.
And those are all about 50% as far as where you're using them.
Right. And that's the thing is, to me, it's more of a thinking about it. Like I would put each one in and kind of listen to them and see how they were. But a lot of times I also just go with a quick preset just to see, because a lot of times, again, we're talking about using the effect in Cakewalk instead and just trying to throw something quick on BandLab to be able to hear what it would sound like.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the differences there in their presets, because the Digi is different than both the FBK and the BL. The FBK and the BL are taking the same approach. The FBK's just got a few extra, the ratio and makeup gain kind of give it a different approach to the same thing. But the BL and the FBK are basically giving you both. They're both attack release based.
Yep. And they just have ratios on the knob for this one.
Is the Digi the one that the guitarists use? I'm kind of curious where these effects get used in the presets often.
Exactly. For the BL1176, I think I just picked one of the cleanest of the vocal ones, and it had a chorus and something else and the Digi and that compressor. So I just got rid of everything except for that compressor.
And those are the presets you see when you add an audio track. Like the reason why you're seeing those presets is because when you went to make this track, you chose the vocal
Yeah,
option. And
exactly. Voice mic.
yeah,
If
the
I'm on
voice
the,
option, you see these. If you went on and said, I'm making a bass track,
Yep.
does it show you the same presets?
It does not. It actually shows me bass presets, which is where I
I
get
would
all my bass.
imagine. Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
classic funk and big bass, fat bass and heavy pick. Like that's where I get a quick
So
sound.
as far as those three compressors go, now that you're getting familiar with the
Yep.
three compressors that they have in your bass presets, pay attention. Tell me as you go along if you notice that like the digi is the big one over on the bass or guitar presets.
For the
Because the
fat
vocal
bass,
presets are going to be very different compared to those two.
one of
Bass
the
and
presets I
guitar
use a lot is the
presets.
fat bass. And the fat bass uses the FBK, it looks like. It's got a noise gate at the front, and then it does a
Ah,
classic basement amp
yeah,
with the bass, as you
interesting.
can see, like cranked
Okay,
way
so
up,
the F.
and then a multi-filter low
So
pass at the end.
so on the FBK, I mean, hey, if it's good enough for a bass instrument, then for your bass voice, that might not be a bad one to experiment with as far as the compressors go.
For the guitars, let's see. Not even sure. I think I use smooth jazz a good bit just to get a cleanish sound. And that's using a spring reverb. It's using a classic twin and a chorus ensemble, but it doesn't have any compression on it. Let's see. About classic rhythm. Just uses a squeeze compressor. There's also the guitar squeeze compressor, which we didn't talk about either. That one's specifically for squeezing guitar signal.
Yeah, and see, that one really keeps us like it's dealing with guitar and squeezing. Sustain and level is like what all you need to focus on.
And then if you were going for metal
All right,
tone,
I'm gonna grab the share for a second,
yep,
and we can continue on with that because that installation is going to continue on for some time.
yep.
But I want to show you now that it rebooted after running that patch. Now, when I want to make a new machine, I'm going to be able to go. I'm going to create a custom machine. And notice what I have now. An Apple
Options.
Mac OS option. So just running that patch makes the VMware support installing an Apple Mac OS. And I happen to have the installed this because I've already done this. And one thing I know which I'm installing is going to be 10.16 here. So you want to establish what you're about to install on a virtual machine before you start installing it. And since I don't have a Mac OS base file yet, I'm actually just going to call this Mac OS 10.16. So that way, when I want to make our ultimate Mac DAW, I'm going to clone from this and I'm going to call it the Mac DAW. And I'm going to give it 2 processors with 4 cores on each. Maybe 2 cores. Yeah, I'll start with 2 cores. It's better to start a machine with low resources and see if you need more. If you can actually set up a machine with little resources, you don't need to jack a virtual machine up. Then it becomes overkill. The whole purpose of virtual machines is to use less energy and more horsepower.
You're trying to
And your computer
customize the
comes with
install to get it more tailored to your needs.
your computer comes with a lot more resources than your operating system uses. My computer here has 4 physical processors, and each processor has 4 cores per. So I can really give this a lot more. Matter of fact, we'll do 2 and 4. And this is the one, this is the RAM part that this is why having more RAM physically comes in handy if you want to run a bunch of machines. Even one machine. For this one, I'm going to actually give it 8 gigs rather than 4 because that'll keep it nice and happy. My machine here has 32 gigs. So that's why this is the perfect physical machine to run virtual machines on. I got 32 gigs.
That's also the reason for
So
you to have the VMware workstation as opposed to the player, because you could also run
Yes.
those machines simultaneously with that much.
I do. I have run 5 or 6 machines on here at points because it's got so many processors. So on the network, I start with NAT. The nice thing with NAT to start is any internet connection that's going on in my physical machine. This basically my physical server becomes a NAT server to the this virtual machine we're going to make. It gives it the internet, but this machine doesn't have direct connection to my cable modem yet. So I'm going to keep it in NAT for now. Eventually, when I make the ultimate DAW, though, I will change it to bridge, because in this mode, it looks just like another machine in my network. If I want this machine to talk to all the other machines I have around me, bridged is going to get me there. But for now, NAT will at least give me an internet connection. It'll come through the physical machine, and it's much safer. You know, when you're really like want to make a sandbox, but you need to connect to the internet, you want to use this because you're isolated in your internet connection. You're not going directly out to the internet. And I don't change these controller types. Whatever they detect for your physical hardware is what you stay with. And in the case of this disk that I'm about to create, I always go here because I like the advanced options. Oh, no, actually, scratch that. We need to make a new one. Okay, so it's making me an install disk, which is going to be 60 gigs. And it's asking, I keep it at what it says, recommended SATA. But it's asking me, do I want to create a new one or use a previous? If I had a previous machine disk and I wanted to boot up from it, I could actually go do that now. But I do actually want to create a new disk. This is the disk we're going to install the Mac OS on. And I'm going to change this to 60 gigs because it actually likes 60 gigs. And I store it all as a single file because when you're moving these machines around, a virtual machine can be moved to other places. One file kind of easier to manage, and it stores it more efficiently. And actually, you'll see when you do split it, it says like this is going to reduce performance on bigger disks. So that's the best choice there. You could allocate all the disk space now and you do get better performance, but you're also sucking up 60 gigs when you don't need to. This disk will grow as I need it to. Mac OS is only going to take 10 gigs, 12 gigs by the time it's done installing. Eventually, I'll eat up more space as I do more, but for the time being, it won't take 60 gigs until it needs 60 gigs. So you don't have to allocate, and you probably shouldn't these days. You don't, the performance gain you get isn't worth the space that you lose. And I'm going to keep the name Mac OS. This is going to be my base copy anytime I need a Mac machine. So there's all the details of the machine. I'm going to hit finish. And before I start it now, I just have to hook up the install image like a virtual CD. So under the CD here, you have this option to either use, if you do have a Mac OS installed disk, those people who have a actual stick or a Mac OS install, you can just connect it and use that to install. But here I'm going to need to go and point to an image file, which I have in my downloads, Big Sur. And now when this machine boots up, it's going to boot up to this, which is an installed disk, and do just like you would in a physical install. And after it gets going, that will take it some time. But hopefully by the end of the night, I'll have OS 10 on here.
Nice.
Here, it really does feel like you're just, sitting in front of a physical MacBook.
Yeah, even more so if you were full screen, but yeah.
Which during the install, what makes these virtual machines really run optimized, full screen and all that stuff, uh, is the VMware tools. So after the operating system gets installed, it's kind of clunky at first. It doesn't do full screen well, and your mouse may not work perfectly, but there's a VMware tools that you install on that operating system. And once you do, it becomes seamless between that. You can make it full screen, your mouse detects properly. The VMware tools is a big key to smooth performance. First time that you install a virtual machine and you try to get it going, you might feel like, whoa, what's going on with my mouse? It's a little clunky because you're running an operating system inside of another operating system, and until the tools are part of that operating system doesn't respond to the mouse as well as it should. So this is actually going to take a moment while this goes on, and we can stop the share on this and let that do its thing. And while that's doing that, I want to jump over here real quick and bring up what we were looking at earlier.
Sure.
And take a listen to this track that we're going to mix, but I'm going to have to switch to this microphone and this headset. So let me make sure that
That's unmuted. Yep, I heard that. Get your
can you
headset.
hear me over here, Glenn?
Yep. Like you're saying, a little bit quieter, but not too bad.
Yeah, it's the difference between a headset mic and a mic.
Yep. It's actually quite good when you're looking straight ahead, so that's good.
Yeah, I'm just firing up the chat room here. The way I can keep an eye over here. And we get that shared. Hopefully we have sound like we did before. And tell me when you
Yep, I see the project now.
cakewalk screen. Beautiful. All right. We got the chat over here. Okay, and let's see if we're getting sound.
Yep. I hear it.
I know we can show our children a better future, one that we would all understand.
As you can see, it's a bigger project that has more parts to it, so more moving parts.
The sound go okay for you?
Yep, sounds good on this end.
Great.
You're hearing it fine on your headphones?
Yep. Yep. The good thing with my headphones here is I will always hear it because it's the mixer. But
Right.
Going out to Zoom, the key to my mixer is making sure that it's Zoom does not go to the wrong input. Seems to be on in the right place. And these new downloads of projects that you grab from BandLab now, they're coming color coded. That's kind of cool. As far as
I like that.
Getting to see the difference in what you're looking at. So although I wish it was consistent, you know what? I bet you there is all the ones that are purple are vocal tracks.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
All the ones that are,
I think the first two and the last two are bass tracks. But actually, Angie's vocals on blue on the end there too. Basically, the pairs of colors though are what are telling us that those are the same tracks, one muted, one not muted.
Yeah. See, I was thinking like, if you're selecting, when you go to select your track and you do the vocal or guitar or bass, I was thinking maybe the color coding was tied to that, but
I think the main idea is just that track 1 is a different color than track 2 is a different color than track 3, but it doesn't matter overall. Like if you're going to run out of colors, you're going to reuse colors.
3, 4, and 5, 6, like, they look like they're all part of a group at that point.
Right.
But
My
looks
thought was
like
they might have gotten
everything's
moved.
neutral. And on this one, I actually did neutralize the tracks on BandLab before I brought them. So everything was set back to 0. Some stuff might be louder than it used to be because the mix over there, I didn't want to interfere with the mix that I'm going to do over here.
But that is an important distinction where if you hadn't gone and zeroed them all out, then every other one of these tracks would have the effects all still on them. You would see like tracks 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, all of those would
Yes.
still have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right now, this is the one with the effects. So I just downloaded it before we started tonight. So it defaults to the wet tracks that you get from BandLab. I want to actually compare that though against the dry ones real quick.
I know we can show our children a better future.
You don't really hear the effects that much.
You did say that you zeroed out the effects before switching over, right?
Yeah. So
For
even the
importing.
wet ones are
Even the wet ones are probably just leveled then.
But there wasn't a lot on there. There wasn't a lot of effects.
I know we can show our children a better future, one that we would all understand.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of effects on there to start. A little bit on Angie's voice. That's what I can primarily hear the difference. So me, I'm going to start with these dry tracks as far as on the mixing. Take me a moment to adapt to my console being on the same screen because that I'm not used to.
And one thing to note also is the volume levels that you were saying. Like you see the first one of those middle couple yellow or brown ones that was just like minus 52 on it, and that one that you're on right now says minus 52, like right down there, right under the.
Yeah, some of those were pulled back actually. So, you know what? I'm gonna bring up
The project itself, and
the
then you can hear what it
revision
looked
that I
like.
got.
Yep.
Yeah. Welcome to my BandLab pane. See how long the page takes to load? Where's the projects?
Under your face.
March.
There it is.
March seems so long ago.
Sure does.
In project days.
I have so many projects that I forked and saved for later, and then I go back and it's like screens and screens. I'm like, wow, I got to work on some of these.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I didn't turn off the effects. Especially now that I know when I'm downloading them with Cakewalk, it's going to give me a dry version. I love
Skip
that.
that step,
I don't
yeah.
have to go turn off effects.
Definitely a bonus.
Yeah, see, so basically I panned everything and zeroed all the inputs. So if I really wanted to see where they had left off in the mix,
It would be one revision back, yeah.
honestly, if you're going to start a mix, if you're going to start a mix from your platform when you're bringing it down from BandLab, then you might as well remix it, because I don't think BandLab levels everything the same way that it does over in Cakewalk. There are differences.
You got your project history right there.
Oh yeah, again, front of your face. They've changed the interface a couple of times, and some of these project settings buttons Yeah, I think yours was the last one.
Could be. That was from a while ago too, right?
Yeah, and see, as far as the panning goes, it's not like a lot of panning changed. The flute, but I'm gonna repan the flute anyway. I'm gonna make that flute move around.
There you go.
Maybe. Depends on the part. Yeah, and other than that, it's these levels. And again, I don't feel like I need to match those levels because you're going to be mixing this over in Cakewalk anyway. So did he just drop. Hold on.
Not sure.
Yes, he did. He crashed. Not because of the virtual machine, but because that machine overheats. And it's why it's not my music machine. Because I'm not going to sit there and record the perfect track and have you crash occasionally
You know, good.
when you overheat. So the good thing is it doesn't affect the virtual machine or its process. You just basically have to start it over. Okay, so as far as where that is versus where this is, it's not drastically different. The levels are a little different on there, but I want to actually just listen to half of this real quick with this.
I know we can show our children
Okay. I'm
Time
gonna
to
need
get the
some
bus.
buses here. Need a reverb. At least just to glue everything together. Need that piano. The piano one's probably not going to send a lot to it though, because it's already, you know, that piano's already full.
It's already got that room sound kind of baked in, yeah.
Yeah, it's just going to tap into the reverb a little bit. Now I'm going to start with the ballroom. I mean, I end up eventually deciding which one more at the end than the beginning, but you get a base starting point for your reverb, and the hall is always where I end up starting. That's our hall. And I don't use these master buses that they do because there's just no need for them. Delete. This is just a bus that it came with. And just like Cakewalk starts with these initial suggested buses for things, and it doesn't do anything. You don't need it, get rid of it. Otherwise, you get surprise sounds and crap sometimes, and you don't need anything running when you don't need it running. Okay, so we're going to start giving some of that reverb to some of these tracks. These other parts, where do they start? It's our bass. Oh, interesting. I don't have, see, this is something I was noticing. Notice that this dry, is that MIDI, Glenn? Is that why? No.
It shouldn't be, no. There is a bass at the bottom as well, though. I'm not sure if the bass one, bass two. Because actually it looks like
this
the
bass track
empty.
on Cakewalk it's empty.
But what
I
about
didn't
the one
download
below it?
anything for the
the stem
Yes,
looks
this
like
is
it's
the
both
wet
there.
one. So
Right.
in this case, I'm gonna have to use the wet one here. But I am curious as to why the dry version didn't come down for this download, because as you can see, it is in there.
It looks like there's a
But
couple of
fortunately,
tracks
like,
down the bottom that also missed one of them.
Yeah, I'm seeing a few
Like
of them that
Gray's vocal, for example.
I bet you there's a logical explanation for it, or it's a bug. And if that's the case, I'll let them know.
Yeah.
But this is workable. Like, not a big deal to get the wet track of a bass. Usually it's the vocals that I want the dry tracks.
I don't think we went crazy on effects on this either, just because the style of the song.
I know we can show our children a better future.
Now I'm going to add one more bus, because I really should have just did it at the beginning. These days it's automatic for me. These are my first two buses, always. On everything. Every single project I do has a reverb, and I TH3 for some sizzle. Tube sizzling is the best way I would describe it.
Nice.
Once it finishes initializing. Because on the bass, for sure, like this TH3 really, bass and guitars always. And it's this airy chords, love it. And I'm just gonna bring the lay level down to 8 for this one. Although you should always experiment with it based on, you base it on the tempo. The delay level
this case,
is
you
pretty
use it.
easy to find the sweet spot.
But in this case, you used it so much, you kind of know where you're
What I'm
going.
gonna do, yeah, I've used it like literally thousands of times. But I'm gonna push this bass to that and see what kind of it just really gives it the like stage presence. I mean, listen to the.
You can hear some more string slide too.
Oh yeah, it heats everything up, so you do have to use it judiciously. And also, whenever I bring it in, this bus always gets pulled back to at least like somewhere's in this range. Otherwise, you will start getting some crazy signals. That's a nice bass line.
Instead,
Okay, so are the rest of these all vocals at this point? Just piano and bass as the two instruments?
I want to say at the very end there's another
Everything
bass,
else
but
is
I'm not
vocal.
sure if that last bass is a second bass track or if that's something different.
Yeah.
Sounds like they wouldn't both be in there. Is probably one or the other situation. Like where one was
Did you do 2 takes?
most likely the one that sounds busier at the bottom is probably
Okay,
the one I left
another
muted.
issue. Oh, that one's a stem. That's why. I was gonna say, why is this one stereo and this one's not? But the dry tracks are mono. The stems are stereo.
Right.
That's why the effects make them stereo. So are those the same bass? You're the bassist, so you tell me. Like,
That's what I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's been a while. Solo one and solo the other, I'd be able to tell the difference. I want to say the bottom one is busier, where there's like more notes. The top one is smoother.
they do sound different. Although it's really hard to hear.
One thing I definitely hear a lot of string noise with that area. That's weird.
Well, let's see how this one would sound in here. See if it gets in the way of the other one. I don't think it does. I think they're.
The guidance to
No, I don't think they are the same. No,
Yeah, they're definitely not the same.
I don't think they are the same because, yeah, I heard a little difference there between that one and that one.
Yeah, I'm not in the habit of usually copying tracks over, but I'll do multiple takes.
So, would you say this one's the better one to use? I think at this point that's a. I'm going to keep this one out of the picture for now because there's definitely a difference.
Right, right.
And as far as the rest of these are all vocals, right? I got great.
You got the flute in green, yeah.
Yeah, the flute. Got to focus on that before I go looking at vocals. And at this point, I want to start rearranging these tracks because, yeah, I'm going to actually do that now that I know which ones are the vocals. That's a vocal. That's a vocal. That's a vocal. Angie.
Lots of Angie vocals.
And then 4 grades. We're going to move all those to a track folder called vocals.
Nice.
That way I can hide them for now. Focus on the ones that are not vocals and where I want to move them. So, I just want to keep the stems together with the, at least to, I don't want to delete anything, so not where I don't need to.
Yep.
Might eventually, if I don't use it, then I guess I will delete it because I won't upload my cakewalk project if I don't have to suck up the bandwidth.
I do like the fact that you have options like, hide muted tracks, things like that, just so that you can get them out of your face, but not necessarily delete them out of the project.
Yeah. Me, I just like to organize because when you're looking on the console, how the console arranges things. Eventually, I get programmed into left to right, and I like to see bass and guitars and instrument stuff, and then the vocals on the console. It becomes a left to right thing. Now this one's going to take a little automation.
Right.
A little
His volume definitely swells up and down
throughout, so that it's so it's there when you need it and in the back.
Definitely different challenges for flute than bass.
I like to try to do is just find a good merging point there. But eventually, I'm going to be, yeah, automating that to be a little higher in certain parts, a little lower in other parts, because it's got more of a drastic swell than
Yep.
the other ones.
Now, some of that you
The
might
bass
be
and
able
the
to do
piano
with
are pretty
compression.
consistent all the way through. Some of it you could. For the flute, I want to do it with just level adjustments strategically, and you know
And that way it won't affect the sound as
manual
much. Yeah.
automation. Yeah, it's I don't want to use compression unless compression is the solution for it. Here, we're just dealing with swelling levels. And yes, compression fixes that in some tracks, but the swelling levels are more about like when Ange is singing a verse, I need that flute to go behind it. And when she's not, it's nice to bring the flute back up for a second and then bring it
Yeah.
back down. When it's like what Veronica was saying the other night about ducking. It is, you are ducking. You're pulling it back when you want something to be in the front, and then you're bringing it up while you're bridging to the next time that the vocalist is going to sing.
Yep.
But because you're doing it manually, you're not ducking. You're level adjusting. So I agree with you with what you said. Like, that's level adjustments.
Yep. That's something I usually would do in BandLab. Do it as just the volume automation, and bring it down here, bring it
Yeah,
up
the,
there, and all that.
automation track is where you're going to get all that work done. All right. So now Ange's vocals. I'm gonna end up needing another bus for that. Oh wow, we're at 12:10, huh? Hey Ange, how
Imagine
are
that.
you on your pumpkin mode?
Haven't seen any complaints yet. So
She
I'm
might have already
okay.
turned into a pumpkin.
I'm turning into a pumpkin. I really am. But I'm okay if you got a few more minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Doing great,
here's
guys.
what I'll do, because I mean we can record this mix no matter what, can finish recording it for later. But before I get started on the vocal parts of this, I mean, I'm gonna add it and I'm gonna create the bus, and we'll just finish it off at that for tonight. Because the vocal mixing is a whole nother phase anyway. But at this point, the music has all been pretty much neutralized. So, love these kinds of scenarios where you've got your music tracks, not a lot of them. This does have some semi complicated ones in the case of this flute. That's a little more unusual of a mixing scenario than, piano and bass. Usually drums. Those are the first instruments that you're dealing with in a mix. And then our vocal tracks, we'll do that one for next week, and we'll get that set up, and we'll get these vocals sounding nice and pretty.
Yep.
So
then we actually have a few different songs that we can work on over time of different styles, because they all have different challenges for mixing. Some of them will be more vocal heavy, some will be more instrument heavy, some will have a lot of tracks, some will have a few tracks, some are more delicate, some are more metal. I mean, it's all, everything has its own unique challenges, so they're all worthwhile to go through, for example.
And the metal mix is a interesting one in itself. So I'll finish with just adding this new bus Nectar that we're going to take a look at next week, and for sure be looking at its usefulness in vocals. This is a plugin that any singer out there should become familiar with. It'll be some great stuff. So we're ready to start playing with those vocals, and next week we'll take a listen to this again. I'll hit stop sharing on that, and I think I didn't blow up my other machine, but we'll take care of that installation on a recording, and we'll talk more about these ultimate virtual machines we're making. We're trying out every DAW and seeing how they all run together and with each other. For those of you that had questions, awesome questions. And if anybody does have questions for the future, PM me or Glenn or Angie, and we'll be sure to throw them in on one of our sessions.
Definitely.
Thanks everybody for hanging out, and love you guys at BandLab.
Yep. Thanks everybody.
And thank you, Glenn, for for riding along with me here.
Yeah, man. Love riding shotgun.
And thank
And all I
Angie
have to
most of all.
say is, it is pumpkin time. And thank you for tuning in to
Toning
Talking
in.
Shhh IT with Tony and Glenn. Till tomorrow night, you all. Toodles.
Not everyone.
Good night.